Dirofilaria imatus. The microfilaria stage is characteristic of this group, and they use insects as intermediate hosts. So this is the stage that would be, it's produced in this case in the dogs, we circulate in the blood, that's how mosquitoes get infected. And the dog's infected by injecting microfilaria when they take a blood meal as part of the life cycle. They're pretty small, this is the red blood cells, so we have some new slides of Dirofilaria imatus. They're blue. But we had like one good slide before and had one microfilaria on it, but I think we're probably in better shape now. So make sure you recognize that, but all you have to do is recognize the stage, okay? I know that this is Dirofilaria, you know that too, that's what I'm going to show you. But the other members of this group also produce that stage, so recognize that as a microfilaria. A relative of this, that's also a filarial nematode that's an important parasite of humans, is Onchocerca volvulus. This causes river blindness. The adults are in nodules, pretty large nodules, under the skin. And that's where, so what you're going to see is a section through one of these nodules, kind of like the ascaris dissection. You've got fairly long adult worms in there that are chopped in half in various places. So what you're looking at is sections through these worms. There's a couple of worms that are all like spaghetti in there and cut in half. But you may even see where there's a couple of uteri. You can see the uteri pretty nice on these females. I'm not going to make you recognize that, but that's what you're looking at. So recognize that that's Onchocerca volvulus adults in what's called the onchocercoma, or the nodule. That's what it says on here, adults in nodule to species. Microfilaria to stage, we don't have any microfilaria of this species. Just look at the look at the heartworm microfilaria, and that's the stage you got to see. That's what I mean by that. Okay, let's flip over to 10, which is where we were supposed to start. Trichinella, we're going to see in muscle tissue. This one has kind of a weird life cycle. It uses the same host, basically as definitive and intermediate hosts. But the adults are actually all the members of this family, the Trichinellidae, including Trichuris, are intracellular nematodes. And the adults of Trichinella are in the cells of the lining intestine, the epithelial cells of the intestine. They travel through there and lay their eggs. And then their larvae actually, and then they migrate into the muscle tissue and produce the nurse cells that we will see in lab. So what you're going to be looking at is preps of muscle tissue. Here's the adults. You're not going to have to recognize them in lab. But the muscle tissue with the nurse cell in it containing the juvenile Trichinella in there. So again, you're going to see a little coiled up juvenile worm inside of this thing that's called the nurse cell. So juvenile is in nurse cell. I may ask you to know that, nurse cell, it's on here. Okay, so that's the name of this cell that's produced by the host and in the muscle tissue, and they actually are vascularized and they feed that little nematode larva in there and kind of take care of it. Unfortunately for the host, I mean, that's what the parasite makes us do. And they remain viable there. If that's in pig meat, you eat, for instance, and you eat some rare pork, then that's how you get trichinosis. And but we can also serve as both definitive and intermediate hosts, so then the life cycle would continue in human if we ingested one of these nurse cells. So recognize the juvenile within the nurse cell. The same family is Trichuris. This is the whipworm, a very common parasite of humans worldwide. You see where it gets the name whipworm? They're pretty big. So you're going to have to move the slide around to see the whole thing. The main body of the worm with the reproductive parts is the handle of the whip. The skinny part of the whip is all esophagus. And that thing is called a stichosome esophagus. It's lined with cells called stichocytes, or I heard somebody say it last week. Stichocytes. Anyway, I always call them stichocytes. But it's a very skinny, long, skinny anterior portion of the worm that contains the esophagus. It's called the whole thing is called the stichosome esophagus. So that's all this stuff up here. You can tell males and females apart if you find the reproductive structures. The females tend to be bigger. Do your best on theirs to try to find the uterus in the female. The males have a spicule, which many nematodes do. Even ascaris has a spicule. You might be able to see it sticking out. But it's going to be sticking out of the posterior end. It's a structure that helps them hold the vulva open during copulation. So take a look at spicule if you can find it on the slide. Okay, we got to know Trichuris eggs to species. Actually, they look a lot like other eggs of closely related worms, but the only one we're going to worry about in lab at least is this one. So we can say we're recognizing that the species eggs of Trichuris. Some of the other, like capillaria eggs, and some of the relatives look like this. They're bipolar. They got these two polar plugs with a partially developed, basically an embryo of a worm inside. Very hard to miss that. As long as, I mean, I could make it hard by having the eggs of some closely related ones, so we're not going to do that. So for our purposes, Trichuris eggs should be pretty easy to recognize. Nothing's going to be too hard to recognize as long as you learn which ones are which and know the names. I guess that's always the case, but they don't look a lot alike. Is the problem? That's what I'm trying to say. If you learn the stuff, you're not going to have difficulty distinguishing between these different things in the nematodes. That'll make it easier than the other tests. Okay, so Trichuris, identified terminal opercula, and then the order Strongylida, Ancylostomidae are the hookworms. These are medically, I suspect, the most important group of nematodes. We've got two genera of hookworm that infect humans, Necator and Ankylostoma. Sometimes I say Ancylostoma, but I think it's supposed to be Ankylostomy. I want you to be able to try to tell these two apart, and the way to do that is to look at the buccal capsule at the mouth of these worms. Okay. The eggs, we're just going to recognize as hookworm eggs, so let's just go there first. This is what the hookworm egg looks like. It has this just embryo basically. It's not a worm yet. It's a fairly undeveloped embryo. It's like kind of like a morula inside of this eggshell. Sometimes the shell might be missing on the slides, but that's your hookworm or hookworm egg. Now, looks a lot like some of the slides I've seen recently. Look a lot like this one. Okay. So in terms of looking at the adults, if we look at Necator americanus, both have sharp structures for causing bleeding in the intestine. And they have a very strong esophagus. The hookworm name comes because the neck region, the head region is hooked, and there's a strong pumping esophagus in there so they can pump blood. So the Necator has plates in the mouth like that. Ancylostoma, there's one up on the board up there. That's the one, the dog hookworms, Ancylostoma canine. But here's, I get this thing to move. Let's look at Ancylostoma duodenale that affects humans. You can see they've got, the plate has been modified into teeth. And if you're able to see that, and that's the trick, because sometimes it's not, depending on how they're laying in there, it's not that obvious. But if you can see that and you see teeth, you know it's Ancylostoma. If it has plates, it's Necator. Ancylostoma caninum, which is a dog hookworm, I'm not going to ask you to recognize that one on the test, but it has 3 teeth on each side. So it looks, you can actually tell those apart, but also where they come from would help. The male on all of these hookworms has a copulatory bursa. Sorry, I'm irritated with this mouse. I'm trying to get it to move. That's this structure down here. Okay, they also have spicules in there, which he has labeled. But this elaborate structure helps with copulation. Okay, and several adult nematode males have copulatory bursae, and that's what I do want you to recognize that structure. You don't have to tell the 2 species apart based on that structure. So whether I'm showing you Ankylostoma or Necator, I want you to be able to tell it's a male that has this thing. That's going to be one of the big giveaways, and know that thing is called the copulatory bursa. That's what it says. Okay, so you should be able to tell male and female apart. You'll be able to see the head if I expect you to tell species apart, and then the eggs are just hookworm eggs. And I know I went fast, but I think that's it. It's quite a bit, but it's easy.